The morning sun spilled through the blinds, casting fractured stripes across the pristine kitchen. Sarah sipped her coffee, her hands trembling slightly despite the calm expression she wore. She watched Mark across the table, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scrolled through emails on his laptop. He seemed absorbed, unaware of the thoughts swirling in her mind, plans carefully hidden behind a facade of domestic normalcy. Mark looked up and smiled, a practiced, warm smile. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his voice casual, tinged with genuine concern. Sarah returned the smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said softly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. She knew he would take her words at face value. Mark always did. He was trusting, too trusting, perhaps, and that was part of the problem. The cracks had been subtle at first, small arguments about nothing, lingering silences over breakfast, Sarah's elusive phone calls. But beneath the surface of their suburban perfection, tension thrummed like an undercurrent, pulling at the edges of their relationship. She studied him now, tracing the lines of his face, memorizing the curve of his jaw. He trusted her utterly, and that trust was intoxicating, dangerous. Mark chuckled at something on his screen, and for a fleeting moment, the kitchen smelled like normality again. Bread toast, coffee, sunlight. But Sarah's thoughts drifted elsewhere. She remembered the night she first thought about control, about power. The way she could manipulate situations, emotions, people. It thrilled her, even frightened her. She had learned early how fragile trust could be, how easily it could be twisted. And Mark, with a steady heart and unwavering faith in her, was the perfect test. A knock at the door startled her, and she looked up sharply. Mark didn't notice. He was still absorbed in his work. "Who could that be so early?" she murmured. She rose to check, her movements graceful, deliberate. Outside, the quiet street lay bathed in sunlight, neighbors tending to lawns, children heading to school. Nothing seemed out of place, but Sarah knew better. Beneath the calm exterior of the town, secrets lingered. Returning to the kitchen, she placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, leaning close. "We should go for dinner tonight," she suggested, her tone light, effortless. "Just us." Mark nodded, smiling, oblivious to the double meaning hidden beneath her words. The perfect life, he thought, unaware of the shadows lurking behind her eyes. And for Sarah, that shadow was intoxicating, a thrill wrapped in the mundane. She poured herself a second cup of coffee, savoring the warmth, the quiet, the secret tension that hummed beneath it all. The day stretched ahead, ordinary to anyone else, but charged with the hidden undercurrents of desire, control, and the first flickers of betrayal. Little did Mark know, their story was only beginning, and the arrival of another figure would soon unravel the delicate balance of their perfect life. The doorbell rang mid-morning, jolting Sarah from her thoughts. Mark glanced up from his laptop, frowning. "That must be Jason," he said casually, his voice brightening. Mark's best friend had always been a fixture in their lives, friendly, easygoing, trusted implicitly. Sarah's lips curved into a practiced smile, though her pulse quickened. Jason brought with him a tension that neither Mark nor anyone else could sense, a subtle charge that lingered in the air whenever he entered the room. Jason stepped inside, tall and confident, shaking Mark's hand first before turning to Sarah. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough for her to feel the spark, a dangerous warmth that shot down her spine. She could see him noticing her, too, the lingering glance, the faint hesitation in his smile. It was innocent to anyone else, casual politeness, but Sarah recognized the unspoken recognition. "Hey, Sarah," Jason said, his voice low, almost private, though Mark was still in the room. "You look different today." "Oh," Sarah replied, arching a brow, her tone teasing yet deliberate. She stepped a fraction closer than necessary, adjusting her hair as she did. Mark noticed nothing. He laughed at some joke Jason made, completely absorbed, trusting the world around him. Sarah's lips pressed together as she met Jason's gaze again. There was a thrill in secrecy, in knowing that behind the ordinary, mundane routines of their suburban life, desire and manipulation could bloom. They settled in the living room, casual chatter filling the space at first. Jason mentioned a work project, Mark interjecting with supportive comments, but Sarah's attention remained fixed on Jason. She caught herself, noticing the curve of his shoulder, the way he leaned in when he spoke, the subtle intensity in his eyes. Each gesture became a silent communication, a small game of power and intrigue. She could feel the lines between friendship, trust, and temptation beginning to blur. For a moment, Mark left the room to take a call, and the air shifted instantly. Sarah and Jason were left alone, and the tension became tangible. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "I can't believe how much time we spend with him around," he murmured. "Sometimes it feels like no one notices us." Sarah's lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "I notice," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than anyone." The words carried weight, charged with unspoken meaning, a careful flirtation designed to intrigue, to bind, to manipulate. She watched his reaction, savoring the subtle flicker in his eyes, the momentary catch of his breath. Mark returned before anything more could happen, breaking the fragile tension with a laugh and a story from work. Jason nodded along, but Sarah noticed how his attention lingered on her once more, a silent promise or warning in his gaze. As the afternoon sunlight slanted across the room, Sarah's mind spun with possibilities, each thought a careful calculation. Desire, control, and the thrill of hidden power danced beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The connection she shared with Jason was a secret current, hidden in plain sight, and she knew it would shape the days ahead. The perfect life, she realized, was already beginning to fracture, its edges softened by secrecy, desire, and the first whispers of betrayal. Weeks passed, and the tension between Sarah and Jason simmered beneath the surface, unspoken but electric. Sarah's carefully measured smiles and casual touches carried a weight no one else noticed, and her mind churned with plans that were far from innocent. The thrill of control had become intoxicating, an addictive power she had never fully felt before. She watched Jason closely, analyzing his routines, his habits, every small detail. Every interaction was a thread she could pull, a subtle maneuver she could use to bend the world to her will. It happened one evening after Mark had fallen asleep. Jason had come over under the pretense of helping Mark with some paperwork. Alone in the kitchen, the tension that had been growing for weeks snapped into a private moment. Sarah's movements were deliberate, practiced, her smile disarming, her words soft, casual. Jason didn't notice the way she guided the conversation, carefully steering him into trusting her completely. "You always know exactly what to say," he said, laughing softly, leaning against the counter. There was no hint of suspicion in his tone, only warmth, admiration, and unspoken desire. Sarah's lips curved into a subtle smile. "I pay attention," she murmured, her voice low, intimate. "I notice everything about the people I care about." The act itself was clinical in its execution, hidden beneath casual gestures and seemingly innocent interactions. Sarah felt no immediate remorse, only a calculated satisfaction, a sensation of dominance, of playing a game where she alone controlled the stakes. It was more than desire. It was revenge against the world, against the trust Jason and Mark took for granted. She rationalized her actions, telling herself it was inevitable, a force beyond ordinary morality. The following days were a delicate dance. Jason remained blissfully unaware, laughing, talking, and leaning in as if nothing had changed. But Sarah watched him with a hawk's intensity, noting every moment, every response, every subtle sign of energy or fatigue. Mark, too, began to notice something was off, not the specifics, just a shadow of difference in the people he loved most. Jason's easy smile flickered in strange ways, and Sarah's casual attentions sometimes carried a tension that was almost imperceptible. She reveled in the control, the power she held invisibly over the people who trusted her most. It was a dangerous, intoxicating edge, and she navigated it with the careful precision of a tightrope walker. Each glance, each word, each deliberate touch built a web that neither Mark nor Jason could yet see, a trap hidden behind the veneer of suburban normality. By the time the first signs of illness appeared, Sarah had already cemented her psychological advantage. The seed had been planted, invisible yet potent, and the tension between trust and betrayal began to fester. Mark felt at first a flicker of unease, a subtle change in Sarah, and a quiet shift in Jason. The perfect life, so carefully curated, had begun its irreversible descent. And just like that, the first act of betrayal had been completed, setting the stage for the dangerous games that were about to follow. The days that followed were a study in subtle tension. Sarah moved through the house like a shadow, smiling when necessary, diverting attention when questions arose. She had perfected the art of appearing ordinary while orchestrating chaos beneath the surface. Mark, always observant but painfully trusting, noticed little shifts. The way Sarah's eyes lingered a fraction too long on Jason, the whispered phone calls she claimed were work-related. Each clue nagged at him, an unease he couldn't define. Jason, too, began to feel it, though he didn't yet know what it was. Fatigue crept into his days in small, almost laughable ways. Lingering soreness, an unexplained dizziness, moments of forgetfulness. At first, he brushed it off, attributing it to stress or long hours at work, but the subtle pattern unsettled him. Sarah watched him closely during these moments, her expression carefully neutral, though the thrill of hidden control simmered beneath the surface. Every cough, every pause, every misstep was a tiny confirmation of the power she held. Mark confronted Sarah one evening while Jason was out. "You've been different lately," he said cautiously, leaning against the doorway, his brow furrowed, concern edging into frustration. "I don't know what it is, but something's off." Sarah tilted her head, her smile soft, almost apologetic. "Mark, you're imagining things," she said, her tone light, but laced with subtle authority. "I'm fine. It's just stress. We've both been busy." Her words were smooth, almost hypnotic, designed to soothe while diverting suspicion. Mark nodded reluctantly, the seed of doubt planted but unable to fully bloom. He trusted her, and yet a sliver of fear began to gnaw at him, quiet but persistent. Meanwhile, Jason noticed the first tangible signs, the way minor cuts lingered longer than normal, the strange bruising, the fatigue that would not lift. He began to question his health, sensing that something was seriously wrong. He tried to speak with Sarah subtly, asking if she noticed changes in him, but her responses were carefully controlled, reassuring but vague. Every question he asked, every concern he voiced, was subtly redirected. The tension between them thickened, almost palpable. Their interactions became a delicate dance, each word, each glance loaded with subtext. Sarah maintained the illusion of normalcy, blending humor and charm with veiled manipulation, while inside, she calculated her next moves, anticipating how each man would respond to the creeping knowledge they did not yet have. Even the small moments, the clinking of dishes, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the muted laughter of neighbors outside, seemed charged with hidden meaning. Every glance exchanged between Sarah and Jason carried more weight than casual familiarity. Mark, increasingly uneasy, sensed it without understanding, his anxiety a silent drumbeat under the household's facade. By the end of the week, Jason could no longer ignore the creeping malaise, and Mark's unease reached a quiet crescendo. Sarah, however, remained in control, the calm eye at the center of an invisible storm. The careful deception, the psychological maneuvering, had only just begun, and the first real cracks in trust were forming, unseen yet inevitable. The perfect illusion was fraying, and the moment of confrontation was drawing ever closer. Jason sat rigid in the sterile clinic chair, the white walls pressing down on him like a weight he could not lift. The doctor's words had cut through the air, sharp and precise. HIV positive. He felt the world shift beneath his feet, the familiar solidity of his life fracturing in an instant. Heat rose to his face, a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief. How could this happen? Who would betray him like this? He left the clinic in a haze, his mind replaying every moment with Sarah, the subtle touches, the lingering glances, the quiet intimacy that had felt thrilling at the time. The realization hit him like a punch. She had done this. He knew it before he could fully articulate it, a dark certainty settling into his chest. Rage burned behind his eyes, a violent storm threatening to spill outward. When he arrived at the house, he found Sarah in the kitchen, humming softly as she arranged a vase of flowers. The ordinary domesticity of the scene made his blood boil. "Sarah," he said, his voice low but trembling, "we need to talk." She looked up, a practiced mask of calm washing over her features. "Of course, Jason. What's wrong?" Her tone was soft, innocent, almost maternal. But he saw it, the careful calculation in her eyes, the way her posture shifted ever so slightly, ready to defend herself. I went to the clinic," he said, struggling to maintain control. "They said, I'm positive. HIV. And," his voice cracked, "Sarah, this is your fault, isn't it?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Jason, I would never. You're jumping to conclusions. How could you think I'd do something like that?" Her words dripped with practiced innocence, but the tension between them was palpable, an invisible thread taut with accusation and denial. Meanwhile, Mark lingered in the doorway, having returned unexpectedly from work. He noticed the charged air immediately, Jason's rigid posture, Sarah's calm mask, the weight of unspoken words between them. Mark's heart began to race. Little pieces fell into place. The subtle glances, the unusual closeness, the hints of secrecy. All of it clicked in his mind like pieces of a puzzle. Jason's hands trembled, clenched into fists. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I trusted you. You. His voice broke, and he sank into the chair, head in his hands. Sarah moved closer, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jason, calm down. We'll figure this out. It's not what you think." Her voice was soothing, disarming, yet the power dynamic was clear. She held knowledge, control, and a secret only she fully understood. Mark stepped forward cautiously, his presence adding a new layer to the tension. He studied both of them, sensing the fractured trust and the manipulation that lingered beneath the surface. Questions swirled in his mind, morality and guilt tangled in a web he could barely comprehend. The room was silent but for the ragged breathing of the two men and the soft, measured movements of Sarah. In that stillness, the complexity of truth and betrayal crystallized. Guilt was not easily assigned, innocence not easily proven. The perfect facade had cracked, revealing the darkness that had always lurked beneath. And yet, the confrontation was only the beginning. The next moves, the next confessions, would shape the dangerous path ahead. Mark stood in the doorway of the living room, his chest tight, fists clenched. The air between him and Sarah seemed to hum with a tension that could not be spoken away. Jason had left hours ago, still reeling from the revelation, and now Mark faced the woman he thought he knew, the one he had trusted completely. The cracks in their life had grown wide enough that there was no longer a semblance of normalcy. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice low but hard, "I know something's going on. I can feel it with you, with Jason. You've been hiding something from me." Sarah tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, almost amused, a faint smile playing at the edges of her lips. "Mark, you're imagining things. I haven't done anything wrong," she said softly, each word carefully measured. But the way her eyes flickered toward him, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders, betrayed her. "I trusted you," Mark said, stepping closer, his voice shaking with a mix of hurt and anger. "Everything about us, about this life, we built it together. And now," his words trailed off, suffocated by disbelief, "I don't even know who you are anymore." Sarah's gaze softened, almost maternal, yet there was an undercurrent he could not ignore, a subtle power in the calmness, a manipulation honed over years. "Mark, I've only ever wanted what's best for us," she whispered. "Sometimes, to protect the people we love, we have to make difficult choices." Mark's stomach churned. Difficult choices? Betrayal? Lies? The words collided in his mind like stones thrown into a dark pond, ripples of anger and sorrow spreading outward. He remembered the small moments, the hidden glances, the whispered phone calls, clues he had dismissed in the name of trust. And now, that trust was fractured, perhaps irreparably. "I don't understand anymore," he said, voice breaking. "I don't even know what's true." Sarah took a deliberate step closer, reducing the physical distance between them to almost nothing. "Mark, truth is complicated," she murmured, her tone soft, disarming. Sometimes the people you love most have to bear the consequences of their actions silently. Her words were both a threat and a promise. Mark's mind reeled with questions, his heart pounding in a rhythm of fear and uncertainty. How far would she go to protect herself? How deep did her manipulation run? And how much had he been blind to all along? Mark sank into a nearby chair, staring at her, searching for a flicker of genuine remorse, a sign of vulnerability, anything that could anchor him in the storm of uncertainty. But Sarah remained calm, composed, a perfect mask hiding intentions he could only guess at. The room fell silent, heavy with unspoken accusations and the weight of secrets. For the first time, Mark realized their marriage, the life they had built, was no longer a safe harbor. Trust had been shattered, and the darkness that had been creeping beneath the surface now hovered openly between them. And as Sarah retreated to the kitchen, humming softly as if nothing had occurred, Mark understood that the delicate balance of power had shifted. What came next would test them all. How far she would go, and how far he could endure, before the fragile threads of their lives snapped completely. Jason's world had narrowed to a single, unrelenting thought: betrayal. Every day since the diagnosis had become a minefield of paranoia and anger. He replayed Sarah's smiles, the seemingly innocent touches, the soft way she had dismissed his fears. All of it now toxic, a twisted puzzle whose pieces cut deep. Sleep eluded him. Food tasted bland. Even the sunlight seemed artificial, mocking the darkness inside him. Obsession had taken root, feeding on rage, growing unchecked. He began keeping meticulous notes, recording Sarah's movements, cataloging her words, tracing her subtle patterns. Each glance she exchanged with Mark, each whispered phone call, each small smile. He observed it all, desperate for confirmation of the truth. The more he watched, the deeper his obsession grew, spiraling into an all-consuming need for justice or vengeance. In the dead of night, he paced the apartment, restless, his thoughts taut with tension. "She'll pay," he muttered under his breath, clenching his fists. The idea of confronting her, of forcing her to face the consequences, became an obsession so real it overshadowed everything else. Rationality had fled, replaced by a cold, calculated rage. He imagined scenarios in vivid detail, confrontations, confessions, even violence. His mind blurred the line between desire for justice and the thrill of revenge. Unbeknownst to him, Sarah had already anticipated the shift. She noticed the way his gaze lingered longer than necessary, the subtle tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching. Every silent step he took toward obsession was mirrored by her careful, deliberate preparation. She played a quiet game of control, predicting his reactions, bending his spiraling thoughts like a sculptor shaping clay. Her awareness of his instability gave her a sense of power that both thrilled and frightened her. Jason's interactions with Mark became strained, tense. Small remarks carried hidden threats. Casual observations were loaded with suspicion. Mark, increasingly perceptive, began to sense that Jason was unraveling, though he could not yet grasp the full scope of the danger. He watched his friend with a growing sense of unease, recognizing the destructive path Jason was walking but powerless to stop it. Late one evening, Jason followed Sarah under the guise of a casual walk, watching her every movement, noting the direction she took, the people she spoke to, the manner in which she conducted herself. Each observation fed his obsession further, sharpening the edge of his intent. He imagined confronting her alone, forcing a confession, extracting the truth from her lips at any cost. Sarah, for her part, moved through the day with calm precision, a predator aware of the prey's rising panic. She had rehearsed her alibis, perfected her casual gestures, and mapped out every possible reaction. Her anticipation of Jason's spiraling obsession added a delicious tension to her day. Each interaction a silent dance of control and counter-control. By the end of the week, Jason's thoughts had darkened into something dangerous. The line between rage and action was thinning, the edge of obsession sharpened to a fine point. The story had reached a precipice, teetering dangerously close to violence. And in the shadows of anticipation, Sarah waited, knowing the moment of reckoning was imminent, and that the carefully constructed web of control she had spun would soon be tested in ways neither man could yet imagine. The night was thick with fog, the streets outside silent as if holding their breath. Jason's footsteps were muffled against the damp pavement as he approached the house, heart hammering in his chest. Every nerve screamed with anticipation and dread. Inside, Sarah moved through the dimly lit kitchen, unaware that the culmination of obsession and rage was about to erupt within these walls. The tension was electric, palpable, as if the air itself vibrated with the promise of violence. Jason slipped inside through the unlocked back door, the soft click of the latch sending a shiver down his spine. He paused, catching a glimpse of Sarah in the kitchen light, calm, composed, arranging silverware as if nothing had shifted in their fragile world. For a brief moment, rage warred with hesitation, every fiber of him aware of the danger he was stepping into. "Jason, what are you doing here?" Sarah's voice was soft, deceptively calm, yet beneath it lay a sharp edge, an instinctive warning. He advanced, fists trembling, his eyes dark with fury. You know what you did." His voice broke, ragged with desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Sarah turned fully, her expression neutral, almost serene. "Jason, calm down. You're not making sense," she said, her words slow, deliberate, a subtle attempt to disarm him. But the tension between them was a live wire, sparking with every heartbeat, every movement. "You lied. You betrayed me," he shouted, taking another step forward. The sound of his anger seemed to fill the room, echoing off the walls, carrying the weight of weeks of fear, rage, and obsession. "I didn't lie," she said, her voice rising, a rare crack in the calm facade. "You're imagining things." Her words hung in the air, brittle and fragile, yet full of defiance. Jason lunged, a wild, desperate movement fueled by betrayal and terror. Sarah stepped back instinctively, knocking over a chair, sending it crashing to the floor. The noise was deafening in the small kitchen, a harsh punctuation to the struggle unfolding. Desperate, Jason grabbed her arm. "Confess. Just tell me the truth," he yelled. Panic and rage collided in a dangerous mixture, and Sarah fought back, twisting free, her nails scraping his skin. They collided again, bodies thrashing in a violent, chaotic struggle. Mark burst into the room, drawn by the noise, his eyes wide with shock. "Stop, both of you." His voice pierced through the chaos, but it barely registered to Jason, whose vision had narrowed to a single point. Sarah, the source of his torment, standing defenseless before him. A final, frantic movement, a slip, and a scream tore through the kitchen. The world seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Jason staggered back, staring in horror as Sarah collapsed, blood pooling around her. His chest heaved, a mixture of disbelief, terror, and sudden realization crashing over him. Mark rushed to her side, trembling, his hands hovering helplessly. "Sarah, no, stay with me." His voice was thick with panic, shaking with grief. Sarah's eyes fluttered, a faint, fleeting recognition passing through them. "I never meant," she whispered, the last syllables fading like a ghost in the fog. Jason sank to the floor, hands over his face, a guttural sob escaping him. The weight of what he had done pressed down, suffocating, inescapable. The room, once ordinary, now bore the scars of rage and betrayal. Every overturned chair, every broken dish, a testament to the psychological torment that had led them here. The night outside remained silent, indifferent to the chaos inside, as the first act of irreversible violence closed, leaving behind a fragile, haunted stillness. The perfect life had shattered completely, and the consequences were only beginning to ripple outward. The flashing red and blue lights outside painted the suburban street in harsh, staccato bursts. Neighbors had gathered along the sidewalks, murmuring and pointing, their curiosity a mix of fear and morbid fascination. Inside the house, police officers moved methodically, photographing the scene, bagging evidence, and taking statements. The chaos of the previous night had left the home scarred, broken furniture, bloodstains on the floor, shattered porcelain scattered across the kitchen tiles. Mark sat on the couch, his face pale, hands trembling, as detectives asked questions he barely comprehended. His heart still raced with the memory of Sarah's final moments, and the image of Jason's wide-eyed horror was burned into his mind. I don't understand," he stammered, voice tight with disbelief. How did it come to this?" The lead detective crouched before him, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. "Mr. Andrews, we need every detail you can recall. Anything unusual, any arguments, anything you noticed in the days leading up." Mark's mind reeled, piecing together moments he had dismissed before. The subtle glances between Sarah and Jason, the whispered phone calls, the small inconsistencies that had seemed insignificant at the time. Guilt gnawed at him. Had he been blind? Had his trust allowed this to happen? Outside, whispers traveled like wildfire. Neighbors exchanged theories, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and judgment. Some remembered Sarah as polite, charming, unassuming. Others had sensed something beneath the surface, an unspoken tension in her interactions. Slowly, the community began to grasp the darkness that had been lurking behind the veneer of suburban normality. Jason, now under police supervision, sat silently, hands bound, eyes hollow. His own torment had morphed into guilt and disbelief. He had acted on rage, but he had also been manipulated, drawn into a trap whose origins had been invisible until it was too late. The weight of both his actions and Sarah's deception pressed down, leaving him a shell of the man he had been just days ago. Detectives began reconstructing the chain of events, uncovering Sarah's careful orchestration, the lies, the manipulation, the psychological control she had exercised over both men. Each revelation added layers of shock, moral ambiguity, and complexity. Who was truly guilty? Was Sarah's betrayal alone sufficient to justify Jason's actions? Could any form of justice balance the fractured lives left in its wake? Mark's thoughts drifted to the small moments, the laughter, the domestic calm, the normalcy he had once taken for granted. They now felt like illusions, fragile masks hiding a darkness he had never suspected. The psychological toll of realization began to sink in, heavy and unrelenting. By nightfall, the house was quiet, the flashing lights replaced by a dim, haunted stillness. Evidence had been collected, statements recorded, and the immediate chaos subdued. Yet inside, the emotional wreckage remained, raw and unhealed. Mark and Jason, though physically unharmed in the aftermath, carried the invisible scars of betrayal, manipulation, and the horror of what had occurred. The perfect illusion of life, order, and trust had crumbled, leaving only the weight of guilt, shock, and moral complexity. The story of Sarah's hidden power, the ripple effects of obsession, and the consequences of betrayal were far from over. The search for understanding and justice had only just begun. The morning sun was pale, almost indifferent, as uniformed officers led Sarah from the house in handcuffs. Her expression remained calm, composed, a mask that concealed the subtle tension beneath. Reporters swarmed outside, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing, but she offered nothing, no apology, no confession, no visible remorse. The arrest was swift, decisive, the culmination of evidence painstakingly gathered by investigators in the aftermath of the murder. Mark watched from the porch, his hands gripping the railing as if holding himself together. Relief and anger warred inside him. Relief that justice had arrived. Anger that the person he had loved and trusted so completely had orchestrated so much chaos, manipulation, and death. His chest tightened with memories of Sarah's calm demeanor, her carefully measured words, the invisible control she had wielded over everyone around her. Jason's family, too, struggled with the psychological fallout. His parents sat in their living room, staring blankly at the muted television, their minds unable to process the chain of events that had led their son into this destructive spiral. The betrayal, the violence, the revelations of manipulation, all had left them hollow, questioning the very nature of trust, morality, and human behavior. Court proceedings began in the following days, the sterile environment of the courtroom a stark contrast to the chaos of the house. Prosecutors laid out the case with meticulous precision, detailing Sarah's psychological manipulation, the infection, and the series of events culminating in murder. Witnesses recounted the subtle behaviors, the moments of tension, the hidden undercurrents of deceit. Each statement added layers of moral complexity to the narrative, challenging assumptions about innocence and guilt. Sarah's defense attempted to frame her actions as accidental, claiming that any harm was unintentional, but the evidence was damning. Medical records, communications, and witness testimony painted a consistent picture of deliberate control, psychological manipulation, and premeditation. The judge's gavel punctuated the air with each procedural motion, a reminder of the weight of accountability in a world distorted by betrayal. Mark and Jason observed quietly, their emotions raw. Anger, grief, confusion, and a gnawing sense of violation intermingled in their minds. Yet, amid the chaos, there was a subtle, fragile relief. The knowledge that truth had been revealed, that justice, though imperfect, was being pursued. They could not erase the trauma, the scars, or the memories, but the acknowledgement of wrongdoing provided a foundation for the slow process of emotional healing. Outside the courtroom, the town buzzed with speculation and whispers. Neighbors reflected on the duplicity hidden behind the facade of suburban normalcy. Conversations carried undertones of fear, fascination, and a stark recognition of human darkness. The case became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that betrayal could lie hidden behind smiles, that obsession could twist into violence, and that justice, though delayed, could still emerge from the shadows. As Sarah was led to her cell, she cast a fleeting glance at Mark and Jason, her eyes unreadable. The weight of her actions pressed down, but she retained a calculated calm. The psychological consequences of her deeds, the fractures she had created, and the moral complexities remained far from resolved. The story of betrayal, obsession, and human darkness had reached a milestone in truth and justice, but the echoes of what had transpired would continue to haunt those involved for years to come. Months had passed since Sarah's arrest, yet the echoes of her actions lingered like a persistent fog. Mark wandered through the house alone, the walls heavy with memory. Each creak of the floorboards, each faint scent of her perfume still lingering in corners, carried reminders of deception and loss. The quiet, once comforting, now felt oppressive, a constant reminder of trust shattered beyond repair. Jason struggled in parallel, attending therapy sessions and doctor's appointments, attempting to reconcile the fury, betrayal, and guilt that consumed him. Every glance in the mirror reflected a man changed irrevocably, haunted by his own spiral into obsession and the violent choices that had erupted from it. Friends and family offered support, but societal judgment weighed heavily, their whispers following him like shadows in the night. The psychological scars were invisible yet unyielding, shaping the contours of his daily life. Mark's thoughts often returned to the idea of morality, wondering how one person's deception could catalyze such destruction. He replayed moments in his mind, dissecting them for clues, asking himself whether there had been signs he ignored. Anger, grief, and a muted sorrow intertwined within him, leaving a hollow ache that no amount of explanation could fill. Yet amidst the turmoil, he clung to fragments of resilience, seeking meaning in the aftermath of chaos. Sarah, confined to her cell, moved through the monotony of incarceration with a carefully maintained composure. Her mind was a labyrinth of reflection and calculation, examining each step she had taken, the ripple effects of her manipulation, and the power she once wielded with subtle mastery. Occasionally, a shadow of doubt or fear crossed her expression, fleeting but telling. Yet mostly, she remained a study in cold introspection, aware of the weight of her crimes, but also of the lingering influence she retained over the lives she had upended. The town, still murmuring about the events that had shaken its perception of normalcy, slowly adapted to a new rhythm. Conversations carried undertones of caution, curiosity, and judgment, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the hidden darkness behind ordinary facades. The emotional fallout persisted in subtle ways, shaping relationships, decisions, and perceptions in quiet, indelible ways. As Sarah sat on the hard cot of her cell, staring at the blank wall before her, she contemplated the consequences, the justice served, and the shadows of her own mind. The web she had spun, the lives she had altered, and the psychological power she had wielded all converged into a chilling, reflective calm. In the stillness, the story closed, but the long shadows of betrayal, obsession, and human darkness stretched far beyond the walls of the courtroom, leaving a haunting question. Could anyone truly escape the echoes of such a life? Years had passed, but the scars of that fateful chain of events remained vivid, etched into the minds of all involved. Mark, though physically unharmed, carried the weight of psychological trauma in every cautious glance, every hesitant interaction. The trust he had once offered freely now came with walls, barriers, a relentless self-awareness that nothing was ever as it seemed. He avoided small talk, avoided familiar streets where echoes of the past lingered in shadows, and yet no amount of distance could erase the memory of betrayal. Jason's life had fractured even more irreparably. Though medical treatment had stabilized his health, the diagnosis remained a constant reminder, an invisible tether to the chaos Sarah had wrought. He wrestled with guilt and rage, not only for the actions he had taken in a blind spiral of obsession, but for allowing himself to be manipulated so completely. Each night, he relived moments, the subtle smile, the casual touch, the words she had whispered, and the mixture of fear and desire that had driven him to destruction. Therapy helped only partially. The deeper psychological wounds refused to heal. Even the community bore invisible marks. Whispers continued in supermarkets, in schoolyards, in office hallways. Sarah had once appeared as an ordinary figure, charming and unassuming, yet the revelation of her actions left neighbors questioning every smile, every neighborly gesture. How much darkness could hide behind the ordinary? How many secrets lingered unseen beneath the calm surfaces of everyday life? Sarah herself remained behind bars, her physical freedom curtailed, but her mind remained an active labyrinth. She reflected on control, desire, and the intricate web she had spun. The prison walls contained her body, but could not fully cage the lingering influence of her actions. The psychological echoes she had set in motion, the obsession, the fear, the fractured trust, continued to ripple outward, unstoppable and persistent. Mark and Jason occasionally crossed paths in court hearings, therapy sessions, or bureaucratic procedures. Each encounter a reminder that the past was never fully buried. Silence hung heavily in these moments, a fragile truce between two men bound by trauma, guilt, and shared experience. Words were unnecessary. The tension, the awareness of what had transpired, spoke volumes in unspoken communication. At night, Mark would sometimes lie awake, haunted by subtle reminders, a misplaced item, a faint scent, a memory triggered by mundane sounds. Jason, too, felt the shadows in quiet moments, an ever-present ache that no explanation could fully alleviate. And Sarah, alone in her cell, occasionally allowed herself a fleeting smile, knowing that even behind steel and concrete, the secrets she had planted continued to haunt, to influence, to unsettle. The story did not end in justice or redemption. It ended in shadows, psychological fractures, lingering guilt, and an unshakable awareness that betrayal leaves marks that never fully fade. The lives intertwined in her web would forever bear the consequences, the memory of what had been done a permanent echo. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the mind, in the lingering glances, the unspoken fears, the whispered doubts, one truth remained undeniable: secrets never die.